Hi, everyone. My name is Shireen Mears. I'm the Neighborhood Initiatives Lead at the City of Edmonton. I've been working on the Tripartite License Renewal Working Group as one of the city representatives, along with Chantil Shannon and Marlene Hankunen. And it's been my role to engage internally with the city and all our various subject matter experts, of which there are many, because the tripartite license goes quite deep. And as a result of our discussions and this amending agreement that now has been agreed by council, I've also been responsible for now operationalizing how we roll out the amending agreement. So I'm really pleased to be here today to hear all of your questions and hopefully being able to answer some of them as well. Thanks for inviting me.
And then just to address the question that's in the chat there, yes, we are recording the session today.
Thank you, Colin. Thank you, Shireen. So yes, and I'll introduce myself. I'm Laura Cunningham-Chaplay. I'm the Executive Director for the EFCL. And like Colin and Shireen, I've been involved in negotiating the Tripartite Agreement alongside our President, Ryan Barber, who wasn't able to join us this morning. But you know, it's been a really exciting journey, and I've had a chance to speak with many of you as league leaders and presidents yourselves around some of the challenges that the existing tripartite has. As someone who was always, or was previously, a president of my own community league, I definitely do appreciate some of the challenges that exist with the previous tripartite agreement, as well as the opportunities that this one holds. So excited to walk forward with all of you. Again, as I mentioned, we do have a lot of people on the call today, and so we are asking that everyone hold their questions to the end of the presentation. And we will be taking one question per person until we get to the point where everyone's asked their questions. It is essential that we hear your questions, that we hear any concerns that you have, so that this will help us on this journey with the tripartite amendment. As you can appreciate, this is really new for us at the EFCL as well as the city. And so we really want to get this as right as possible. We anticipate there will be some bumps along the way. But your questions and your concerns that you articulate today are essential in us making sure that we can communicate all of this information the best way possible going forward. So again, our objectives today were to really articulate some of the challenges we saw, recognizing the impetus for change, outline the new amending agreement, and talk with you about how to participate in new opportunities going forward. So just want to recap a little bit about what the existing tripartite license agreement is. It is a 10-year land use agreement between the City of Edmonton, the Edmonton Federation of Community Leagues, and each individual league. The last agreement was signed in 2011 and expires at the end of 2021. So this 10-year agreement, the conversations began back in 2019. This isn't something that we just have jumped into now, because it does take a long time to have the engagement that we need on both sides, from the city perspective and the league perspective, as to what are the needs of people and leagues as we move forward. And as Shireen mentioned, the city's been engaging with all sorts of subject matter experts in city departments that work with in some way or touch in some way that licensed land or that parkland that's adjacent to leagues. And so there's been a lot of conversations that have happened over the last year and a half, and there continues to be. So again, the majority of the sites that are licensed to leagues sit currently on lands that are designated as municipal reserve. So this municipal reserve land falls under the jurisdiction of the Municipal Government Act. And the link to that will be in the chat there for you, so that if you're interested at all in specifically what section is referenced around leagues and what page number. So the Act specifies that public recreation is an acceptable use of municipal reserve. What the Act doesn't prohibit is commercial entity from providing that public recreation on land designated as municipal reserve. So in the existing Act, it does not specify that a commercial entity cannot provide that public recreation. The current tripartite agreement that was written in 2011 does, however, prohibit that commercial activity of any kind. And again, that existing tripartite agreement expires at the end of 2021. and is what made it essential for us to have this amendment. This amendment is what is allowing us to make the change for the commercial use. So, what is the amending agreement? So the amending agreement is, as I just mentioned, the amendment to the existing tripartite agreement that was signed in 2011. This amending agreement is now what makes it possible for community leagues to allow commercial use on the sites licensed to them for public recreation. The one thing to also note, and we'll note it later on in the presentation, but the definition of public recreation in this amending agreement has also been expanded from the original tripartite license agreement. And as I said, we will expand on that later in the presentation. With this amending agreement, leagues now will have one of two agreement options. So they will obviously be able to do the short-term rental agreements, which are your short-term, one-offs, birthday parties, rentals for anniversaries or occasions. And then the other agreement option, which will be that sub-license agreement, which will be approved by the City of Edmonton. And that'll be for anything that is continuous and ongoing, any activity that the league is doing that is longer term, as opposed to that one-off rental. So what did we do? How did we land here? So back in 2019 and 2020, the EFCL hosted 5 roundtable sessions. We utilized an online survey to hear from leagues, and we discussed the agreement with members at our general meetings. From there, we continued in the discussions and negotiations with the City of Edmonton to develop this new license agreement that would better serve leagues and ultimately their neighborhoods. And this is the one that we're working towards that expires, that would begin in 2022. And it became clear to the EFCL during the negotiations and through COVID in particular, that a new model for leagues needed to be explored. Once we had clarity with the city that it was not the MGA that specified that commercial use was prohibited on reserve land, we were then able to move to an opportunity to explore with the city around what this could mean for leagues. So the amendment to the existing agreement, as I mentioned, does allow for some for-profit public recreation on licensed land. And this was easiest to do with an amendment. So the amendment was passed by council, and again, was a motion from council to amend the existing agreement to allow for some for-profit recreational uses. The intention now is that the language from this amendment will be moved into the new tripartite agreement that will begin in 2022. So again, just to share a little bit about what leagues shared with us during those engagement sessions, that leagues were really clear that there needed to be new avenues to raise money. And this was back before COVID. These roundtables and sessions all occurred before COVID even hit. But even then, leagues were saying, the cost to keep up facilities, the cost to keep our amenities in good condition, it's tough using grants all the time. We need different opportunities to raise funds. Leagues recognized that the hall spaces in many cases were underutilized, and that league facilities should be used as much as possible for the benefit of the community, and that it shouldn't be so much a matter of who provides that benefit, but that those hall spaces, those rink spaces, any space on that licensed land should be used to the greatest of extent to create that hub, that place where people can gather and learn together and recreate together. We heard pretty clearly that volunteers have really felt burdened by the existing tripartite agreement and its restrictions around how to run programs. This was often falling on volunteers to create the contracts, to create, to create advertising, to recruit people, to attend these programs, and it was often at the risk of the league, right? So the league would invest the funding, the league would invest the effort, and sometimes those programs didn't work out, and it would be the league that was left, paying for it or covering those costs, and volunteers who often were having to do a lot of the work. when really often people who volunteer for leagues are interested in perhaps doing other sorts of things to help enhance the community. So changes to the agreement would enable better use of the hall, allowing additional programming for the neighborhood and an additional income source for the league, right? So again, it goes back to that feeling that sometimes the halls are underutilized and that there could be a way to really enhance the utilization. Oh, I just need to flag that maybe to the person that's controlling the intake of people that there's been a couple people that are waiting to still enter into the meeting. I think Kim or Jenny, can you just double check the waiting room?
Yeah, there are none that I see right now, but perhaps they're having issues getting in. I'll keep my eyes open, Laura.
Okay. Yeah, it says, oh, that's interesting. Okay. Okay, so we'll keep moving along here. For-profit users should be in service of the community. So I think we heard really clearly from leagues that it was really important that anyone that rents the hall, uses the hall, no matter if they're a for-profit or a non-profit for that matter, really needs to be in service of the needs of the community. So anything from classes, services, markets, craft sales, any of that recreational programming, really is about how do we engage our neighbors, how do we connect people, how do we serve better the people in our community. So some of the changes that are made in the amending agreement. Again, I mentioned earlier, so the update of a definition of facilities. So the definition of facilities in the amending agreement has been expanded. Just to include, over the 10 years, we've seen pickleball courts pop up and different amenities that we didn't have, that weren't as popular back in 2010, 2011. The definition of recreation was also updated. It was previously defined solely as sports, social, community, and cultural facilities and programs. Now the definition, which we'll have on a slide later on, but states it means the experience that results from freely chosen participation in physical, social, cultural, intellectual, creative, and spiritual pursuits that enhance not only individual, but community well-being. So that's an expanded definition that, we hope will help leagues to, again, sort of seek further opportunities than maybe they felt they were able to previously with the definition. The definition of sublicense and sublicensee, that definition has been expanded, again, to include third parties that are not for-profit or for-profit organizations for the use of the space, again, for the purpose of that public recreation. Sublicensee, again, has been expanded to define meaning, again, a third party that could be a not-for-profit or a for-profit organization, which has entered into a sublicense agreement with the league. And again, that sublicense agreement, I just want to reflect a little bit as a previous community league president. The thought of a sublicense agreement seemed always daunting. It was always tied before to occupation of space within a league hall or within the site. And I just, want to sort of reiterate that this new sublicense agreement will be not only just about occupation, because that's definitely still important if you decide that you want to rent out your hall or your league to an organization that will occupy space. That's always important. But this sublicense agreement is also around that continuous long-term relationship. So if you decide that you want to have a class that's run by a for-profit organization and you want to run that for a year, there will be a sublicense agreement that will be required. We're not looking to make these very difficult or onerous. It's just an agreement that will be put in place that will be sent over to the city so that they can help leagues to keep track of what's going on in the hall. There's another piece that's been updated in the amending agreement is around that removal of commercial use as a prohibited activity. Again, so that ensures that commercial use is an allowable activity going forward. There's been some updates to relevant MGA sections, so sections of the Municipal Government Act that are updated in this agreement. There's been an update to insurance and indemnity sections in the amending agreement, and this aligns with industry standards and also aligns with what you currently have with foster park brokers. So anything you see in that amending agreement, if you are insured under foster park brokers, you are currently covered for to that extent. Again, the previous tripartite was written 10 years ago. Insurance was different and industry standards were different 10 years ago. The tax section has been revised in the amending agreement. So there's the removal of section 22, which tried to ensure tax exemption for a league acting as and performing functions of a league. So we'll put in the chat the community organization property tax exemption regulation, just for your reference if you're interested. But you know, the city, in the 2011 Tripartite Agreement, it stated that members of the EFCL were exempt from property tax as long as they were acting and performing the functions of a community league. And fundamentally, that still applies today, but the city has a responsibility to ensure that leagues and other organizations comply with nonprofit taxation law in order to remain tax exempt. So the city and the EFCL are really committed to working to ensure leagues retain their tax exempt status, and that this is why the processes are being put in place to increase that communication around how leagues are using their space to ensure that tax exempt status is retained. The section in the amending agreement has changed around rentals and bookings section has changed. So it's now called short-term rentals. So this changed from the section 35 in the existing tripartite that didn't provide a time frame. So it, it didn't specify what short-term booking rentals was. So now, again, as I mentioned earlier, leagues can continue to rent for short periods of time, to one-off bookings, of course, like your birthday parties, your events, your afternoon workshops, your craft sales, those one-time events. What changes, though, is when a league is interested in creating that regular, continuous, longer-term agreement with a third party of any kind, a requirement for that sub-license agreement will be required. So any third party that uses space ongoing would of course still require that sub-license agreement, which is what is currently in effect as well. So if you have a preschool that's occupying space or a play school or a daycare, you require a sub-license agreement. And again, the intention here is to have that open communication on all sides on how the facility is being used. Again, this is a new process for everyone. And so it's really important that we understand what is being used in the hall, what programs and activities are happening that are that long-term continuous use. So again, what's allowed is that for-profit rentals with a public recreation focus. And again, for your reference, that definition of recreation has now been expanded. Right? So again, we always encourage leagues to work with nonprofits in our city. We know that there are so many nonprofit organizations that are looking for space, that are wanting to serve the neighborhood, wanting to help the community. Allowing for-profit rentals is allowing leagues some other greater opportunities. But by no means does it mean that you can't continue your work with nonprofits. And again, we always encourage that. This just opens the door for different and new opportunities. So as you can see, there's several different elements to the definition of recreation. So sometimes we think about what could be that physical recreation. What's that physical recreation? Well, there are summer camps for kids that are run by for-profit entities. Not all summer camps are nonprofit. So perhaps the league is interested in ensuring there's a summer camp available for kids and they want to engage with that for-profit organization to run that camp in the community. That's something that would be allowed. Social, perhaps you want to rent to a local business who's hosting their summer barbecue, and that's something that's the social activity that's really perhaps even for maybe they'll open it up wider, but maybe they just want to have it for their staff. And again, that's something that's easily something that would fall under this. Intellectual, perhaps you want to rent to a local tutoring business, right? That can come in and provide a service after school to kids in the neighborhood. And so it's maybe not a nonprofit, it's someone that has a business around tutoring, but you recognize that there's lots of young kids that are, you know, attending school, and it could be something that could be done after school. That's something that could be allowable in your space. In the creative elements, you know, there's been talk with a few different leagues, and some leagues have explored, you know, creative art hives or opportunities where people can come and do arts and crafts, and there are people that will host those things for them. You know, you can host local musicians, you know, they could come and rent for a night and host a concert. And maybe it's a couple nights or once a month, something like that. Spiritual, you know, you can host a meditation retreat, you can host a session on mindfulness. And again, that might be a business that hosts it, but that would be, again, for the benefit of your neighbors, for the benefit of your community. So those are some examples, and by no means limiting you, but I think, you know, it's really important for the EFCL and the city, for leagues to really start exploring what could be. And I think we're really committed, I know we're really committed on both sides to really explore this openly with leagues. This isn't about saying no, it's about exploring what is possible and really working together with that open communication on all sides around what can be done with this new amending agreement. Again, what's not allowed on your space, as always, is any for-profit rentals that do not have a recreation focus. So again, that's always that parameter there that is under the MGA, that the space is always used for recreation. So now, what does this mean? What do leagues need to do? What are your next steps as you start to embark on this as folks? Well, you know, we would always say that your first step always is to discuss with your board members, with your community members, your neighbors, to your local startup businesses, artists, so on, all those folks that live in your community, and to understand, you know, their needs, understand the direction that they're interested in, what they want to see in the community league, so that when you come together as a board, you can have some really good, robust conversations around what you've heard. You know, this is a journey, it's a new approach. We're all encouraging leagues to really move slowly, to have discussions, because this is the time to explore those opportunities, and it is, you know, very exciting. But the first step that you would need to do is have a motion, right? So in accordance with your league bylaws, your board will need to put forward a motion at one of your meetings, or however you're able to do your motions, to enter into the amending agreement. You will also have to be really clear as to who has signing authority at your league, as well as ensuring they have an active email address. Because once that motion is made, you will send that information along to your NRC. Once your NRC has that information, so even if you just sent the motion to your NRC so that they know who approved the motion, that maybe in the motion you could even state who has a signing authority. You ensure your NRC also has the right email addresses for the signing authorities. Because the next step then will be the DocuSign process. So these, obviously through COVID, we need to ensure that documents are being signed safely. So the City of Edmonton contracts team will then send out agreements to be signed by the league, the folks that have the authority to sign. Once those are then signed by the EFCL will sign them, the city will sign them. There will be 3 or 4 signatures, depending how many signatories are at the league, on that agreement. Once all those people have signed the document, your agreement is enacted. You will receive a copy of that agreement. EFCL will receive a copy of the agreement, and the city will have a copy of that agreement. Once that agreement is enacted, as you are able to move forward with commercial use by a third party on your land. And again, you can continue the rental agreements, those short-term rental agreements for commercial use, as well as those sub-license agreements with any third party. And so as long as the use supports, again, the objectives of the league, is in accordance with the Tripartite Agreement, and provides that neighborhood public recreation. that commercial use is now able to happen. So how does this impact your league? Are there impacts on your league? Again, as I've mentioned a few times, the sub-licenses will be required. EFCL will be working closely with the city to create a template agreement for the sub-licenses. In the past, sub-licenses were only required when there was occupation of the hall, right? Where there was that exclusive use. Now, with the change to commercial use, it's important that the city know which ongoing programs, rentals, and activities are occurring on the licensed land, again, in order to ensure that leagues remain tax exempt. So again, the sub-license agreement is one that outlines the responsibilities of each party, any insurance or liability requirements, and it will always include a cancellation clause so that either side can end the agreement if it's no longer working. As I mentioned before, we're really looking to make sure that this process is simple, is well articulated for leagues, is easy to follow so that this doesn't hold up leagues from having these opportunities with their hall, with their licensed land. But again, this is a new process. And so we really encourage everyone to be patient, to work with us, and to continuously articulate any concerns that come up so that we can ensure the process is as smooth as possible going forward. We want to remind leagues that if you have a current arrangement with for-profit or non-for-profit, that is that long-term continuous use, that is an occupation or long-term continuous use, that you need to have a sub-license in place. So again, that's something that you can speak with your NRC about. They will be the ones that will be handling the sub-licenses. But we want to ensure that anything that you have specifically that occupies space in your hall right now, that your sub-license is in place and up to date. So again, as I mentioned, the new sub-license process is being developed. We're working to create this process. We're working together to create a flow chart that identifies clearly when a sub-license would be required. And we'll also be creating those sub-license templates, right? Similar to some of the rental templates that you've seen on the EFCL website, which will clearly communicate the process to you. Your NRCs will be your main point of contact, right? They will support leagues where existing activities may require a sub-license agreement as well that aren't currently in place. So we recognize that everyone's excited. We recognize that, you're already started thinking about some possibilities, that you're already, itching to move forward with some of these things. And again, we just ask that everyone be patient with us as we work through developing these processes. And the city really is interested in looking at each sub-license agreement that comes in individually, right? So that the simple ones will take less time, the more complex ones might take a little bit more time. And so it'll be important to hear today, again, maybe some of the thoughts or things that you're thinking of, so that as we can develop these processes, we can ensure that they meet your needs and that they are really continuous. So setting up, yeah, so I think that's on that one. And then again, leagues would submit that sub-license package to Neighbourhood Services, to their NRC for approval. The package would include, a letter that sort of states from the league to the city outlining your intention, the motion from the board meeting where the sub-license was proposed, right? We always want to make sure that the board is aware of what sub-licenses they're getting into, what agreements the board has and what they are responsible to. And the package would also include, obviously, that filled out sub-license agreement that would be provided. Again, this process is still undergoing, creation. And so this is the process that we've articulated today that we recognize might shift and change depending on our conversations with you folks today and Tuesday. But at this point, it's really important for us, as well as at the city, that the board be involved with these sub-licenses as they go forward, so that there's a lot of transparency and a lot of communication around what agreements leagues are getting themselves involved with and what agencies or businesses or third parties are going to be part of the league space ongoing for those continuous longer term programs. So before I turn it over for questions, I just want to check with my colleagues, Shireen and Colin, to see if there was anything that I missed or anything that you'd like to add in to this point.
If I could add a few things, Laura.
Sure.
Just in terms of, yes, the sublicense process, as you mentioned, we'll be working very closely with the FCL to develop a new sublicense template, similar to the rental agreement template that is already available on the EFCL website. And by the city having sight of the sublicense agreement, our intention is that that will provide the written approval for the agreement. However, in cases of complex commercial use where perhaps a third party, not-for-profit or for-profit, wants to utilize, say, part of the hall. So like a community cafe, for example, would be quite complex because it would involve a number of different approval processes, such as business licensing, potentially external licensing from the province, AHS, for example. That's where we'll really need to focus on this process where it's a submission of the sublicense package. For the more simple programming, it'll be absolutely fine just to use the sublicense template that we will be creating and having available soon, and that will allow you to carry on business as you currently are, or to indeed increase and do new things with that. Just one other clarification. Although you'll be working, of course, with your NRC, it will not be the NRC who will approve it, because this agreement is signed by, at the moment, by the branch manager. We're just figuring out internally how we can delegate some of that authority and I guess fast track the process. So the NRC will definitely be involved in being that, I guess, middleman to bring information back and forth and to support you, but won't be making the decision.
Okay, thank you, Shireen. Colin, anything else that we missed?
I don't think there's anything else missed. I just want to reinforce that really when we advocated for this, the point behind it was opening up those opportunities that we've heard from all of you over many, many years of this term to try to allow some of that commercial use to happen while balancing the need that we also heard that it should be in service to the community, and then also balancing it with the risk management of protecting your taxation status and your nonprofit status in general. So that's why the approval piece really came into force, to make sure that we're considering all of those things in balance. And then Laura, once you open it up for questions, just so you know, I have a list of what's come up in the chat so far.
Oh, good. Okay. And so do we want to maybe, should we start with the chat questions, I guess, is what I'm wondering, and then move into because of some of the other, and then to open it up. So maybe if you can start with one of the questions there, Colin, that you have in the chat.
For sure. So the first one is a question around what would be commercial versus recreational, and this is from Chase at Beacon Heights, and his comment was just a clarification. So we couldn't rent out to, let's say, someone with an essential oils side business in the community.
Right. So I think, again, the commercial entity that you rent to needs to have a recreational focus. And so that definition of recreation, if what that commercial business is looking to do meets that definition of public recreation. So in the case of your essential oils example, right, if it's somehow enhances, the community life in some way, from like a spiritual or a creative or intellectual, social at this point, that would be allowed. Yeah.
Yeah, and to expand on that, really what we've talked about at the EFCL in the city is that this process, we are intending it to be as based around getting to yes as possible. So we would never start this discussion with a no. We would start this discussion with, well, how do you think that provides freely chosen recreation opportunities in the community. So really, it would come from how the league can justify it as providing those opportunities.
That's right. Yeah. Thanks, Colin.
Can I
Go
add
ahead,
to that,
Shireen.
Colin? I think the other way to think about it too is about the recreational use. So the business being occupying a site within the hall may not constitute a recreational use because it's there, it's based there. It's more about the commercial transactions that will occur from that hall. I don't think that would be the intention. If this provider was to offer essential oil spiritual sessions and other types of activities that would align with their business model, then that might be a little bit different. But to just open up the hall to a space to sell something may be more commercial than recreation. So again, this is where we're saying that for some of these more complex or very new ideas, we would have to have a conversation more on a case-by-case basis.
Yeah. Thanks, Shireen. Yeah. Colin, is there another question? Or I think, Dave, it looks like you have is that a question off of this one, Dave?
No, it's a different question entirely.
Okay, we'll just try to get through the chat questions first, and then we'll go to the group.
Okay, so the next question from Tracy at Parkview was her wanting to get a little more clarity on. Sorry, that question disappeared. A little more clarity on the idea of when approval is needed from the city.
Yeah. And Shireen, maybe you want to answer that one?
Sure. So just a few things. You mentioned there about sort of the process for each individual community league board to approve the amending agreement. So that's the first thing. The first step is before any league begins to undertake commercial relationship with a third party to deliver some type of recreation use, we need to make sure that the amending agreement is signed. So hopefully on the 20th, or maybe by the 21st at the latest, our director, Chantil Shannon, will be sending out an email. And in that email, it'll be similar to the letter that was sent out to all leagues on December 9th. It will include a copy of the original tripartite agreement, the amending agreement, and what we're also going to contain there is a form that leagues can complete to let us know when you've had the opportunity to meet with your board to discuss this and to approve signing the amending agreement. In that form, you'll also then provide us with your signatories. And then that way, we will have all of that information to provide to our contracts team to draw up that DocuSign electronic signature document. The good thing about being able to move to the DocuSign agreements, we no longer require corporate seals. We don't require forms completed in triplicate. So that is a big move that we've been able to make in this 10 years since the last agreement as well. The other thing that then once the community league signs the agreement by the DocuSign, it will come back to the contracts team, and the contracts team, well, actually they won't do it. DocuSign will automatically send it to the EFCL to sign, which again, they've already approved the signing of that, and then it will be sent back to the city to sign. So that's the sort of process. It goes to league, to EFCL, and then to the city. Once all the signatures have been on there, it'll go to our clerk's team to enact, which is basically putting the date on and make sure that everything's completed properly. And then, as Laura said, a copy will be sent out to everyone so that everyone has a copy of that file. So once that's completed, then it is, as I think the slide said, feasible for you to start to entertain whether it's a rental agreement or a sublicense agreement with a third party for-profit provider. I did see there was a question about third party. Third party is, as a definition, is just the entity that that a community league would enter into agreement with. So that would be could be a renter, it could be a for-profit user, could be a not-for-profit user, whoever that entity is who is renting or using your hall through a sublicense process.